Welcome to the opening track for the Climate and Nature panel. It's a very challenging time in the world for a lot of things, and I think that's certainly true for climate and the planet. Climate funding is falling short, emissions are up. We have a US administration that's hell-bent on rolling back a lot of the progress. And this, of course, ahead of COP30 that starts next week. I don't know how that came up so quickly. And then there's a lot of backtracking going on. I don't know if people read this morning, but Bill Gates is the latest billionaire to kind of backtrack on climate action and the severity of the issue that we're facing. And finally, at the same time, we have AI driving up demand for energy, which is, creating a whole nother dynamic. So there's a lot to talk about today. I think we'll touch on some of those issues, as will the sessions in this track over the coming days. So with that, I hope that's as much as you'll hear from me. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists here who helped shape this track and bring a lot of expertise to this conversation. So Betsy, to my left, is founding partner and managing director of Velveteen Ventures. And I understand that's from the children's book?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And that's a native women-led VC investing in solutions for children and the planet for the next 7 generations, which is a very indigenous perspective. She's also an entrepreneur, founder of a nonprofit, Natives Rising, and if that is not enough, she has a new book about to come out. You're having a book signing after this?
Yes, right after.
Yeah.
And it's the first time it's available, actually, to the public, pre-published days. So.
All right. So welcome, Betsy. And then we have Kate Williams, who's the CEO and founder, right? No, founder, okay, CEO of 1% for the Planet, which probably most people have heard of, but it's a global organization that enables corporations and individuals to, give to climate nonprofits that are vetted by 1%. And the organization has mobilized hundreds of millions of dollars, so it's very important in this time of, climate funding that is getting more and more scarce. So welcome, Kate. And Kate's been traveling a lot, so you can bring, I think, a perspective from some of the other places that you've been. Last but not least, my friend Chante Harris, fellow New Yorker, is the founder and managing partner of Eunoia Group, which is a platform for advancing climate innovation and investment through de-risk as a service for founders and investors. You're going to have to explain what that means, Chante. And she's worked with the Obama administration, corporate, Fortune 500 companies, and the Schmidt Futures. So Chante brings a lot of experience to this conversation as well. So with that, let's just dive right in. This is the opening panel, so we like to set the stage for the conversations to come. So let me ask each of you, what is the state of climate and nature, of the field of climate and nature right now? And where are we? And is impact investing meeting the moment? Why don't we start with Chante? Okay.
Sure. Hi, good morning. Thanks for coming to join us at 9 a.m. I'm sure folks had late dinners and cocktails, so appreciate you being here. I guess there's a lot of not great things right now, so maybe I'll talk about some of the good things I'm seeing in light of a lot of the shifts that are happening at a geopolitical and macro scale. I know we talked about this, Amy, before during the prep, but I think one of the good things coming out of this moment is a focus on nature and how do we protect nature, what does it look like to invest in nature, and how do you start to quantify the value of nature from a finance perspective. And I do think that's big because one of my advisors used to be at a global securities firm, and he mentioned that Bloomberg and a lot of the other big financial companies are actually meeting about how to think about nature investments, which wasn't happening 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so I think as we're seeing this important conversation, I think particularly because we're in San Francisco, I should say this, that tech is not going to save us. And I'm someone who has worked in technology, so I believe in technology and science and the ability for it to improve our goals around mitigation. But we also are seeing how if we don't have the right types of really environments, right, for these technologies to scale, which include policy and large commercial financiers, how quickly they can die. So on one hand, it's, hey, what are the actual commercial solutions that we can continue to scale on the science and the tech side that make a lot of sense, but also we've kind of been neglecting the role of nature, I think, in many ways, and how important it is to finance nature. So I'm really excited about that, and I think the other area that is important to note is really the global south. There's a large number of, I think, families and philanthropies that are saying, I think, hey, what does it look like to invest in emerging economies where we know we're going to be building a lot of infrastructure? There's a lot of need for resiliency in those areas, and how do we really put majority of our giving to the global south and to resilience? And so I think that those two areas are really important areas to note because they present an opportunity as much as there's a million challenges that I think whether you're new to climate or you've been in it for a long time, like we're seeing this unprecedented moment where it really is challenging us to think differently and to go, hey, this isn't working. And just because it isn't working doesn't mean that certain things haven't worked, but how can we identify the things that are working and say what are the things that could work better?
Great. Kate? Hey, everyone. I want to talk about this in two ways. One, I just want to tell you a little bit about how 1% for the Planet works, just so that you understand sort of where I'm coming from. I mostly am focused on philanthropy as it relates to climate and other environmental issues, but we also do have a product that has an impact investing element to it. So just high level, the way 1% for the Planet is set up is we are a model that engages businesses to give 1% of their top line revenues to environmental nonprofits. And the framework that we use for that is 4 impact areas that are just economies, resilient communities, rights to nature, and conservation and restoration. You'll see we don't have the word climate at the sort of headline level there, but it threads through all of those. And that's one of the sort of kind of points that I would want to share in this moment is I think what we're seeing is a lot of opportunity to kind of break down the larger climate framework into the sort of bite-sized ways that people can make progress that are meaningful for them. And that's, I think particularly true in the realm of philanthropy because really most often, whether it's a company or a individual, they give and they are consistent givers when it's something that they, have a connection to and care about. And so that framework of impact areas is, tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, tied to Project Drawdown, so it's very real solutions, but we've framed it in such a way that there's a lot of access points, and that's been really important. And then also operating on that framework is this other product that we have, which is our Planet Impact Fund, which is sort of less well known as part of 1% for the Planet. It's a newer element that we've added, which we kind of created as an accelerator, because our big sort of goal is to change the percentage of funding going to climate, which I'm sure most of you know the number is woefully underfunding. We're doing about 2 or 3% of total philanthropy is going to climate issues. It's been stuck there for a very long time. And that's not because we don't know the solutions, it's just because we haven't quite figured out how to get it to stick. And so we have our business model, which I described, which is incremental, 1% by 1%, and it's grown significantly. We've certified more than $820 million to date. We're on track to get to our first $1 billion in the next 18 months or so, but we know that that's still not enough, and we wanted to create a way that we could accelerate giving. So the Planet Impact Fund is a collaborative fund similar to a DAF model. Any donor can make a donation of any size to the Planet Impact Fund. It drops into a fund that we invest at the high level for positive impact, both public and private investments. And then annually we grant 10% of the fund to environmental partners that we vetted through our models, through those 4 impact areas. We have a portfolio for nonprofits that we rotate every couple of years representing those impact areas. So with all of that, I'll say I think the state of what we are seeing is that, and again, Amy mentioned that I've been traveling a lot, so I've been able to talk to a lot of our stakeholders in the US and outside of the US, and we've seen a really high level of engagement, a lot of people showing up, and a lot of curiosity about kind of how do we stay the course on our values at a time when there are a lot of headwinds. And we haven't, you know, we don't have the secret unlock, the silver bullet, but what we have found is really trying to meet people where they are and have them understand how they can frame what they're doing in a way that's aligned with their brand, aligned with their objectives, aligned with their sort of personal giving values. Again, even if it's not using the word climate, but it's getting at root causes, we found that to be effective, if slow, in these times.
Yeah, I think to give a bit more background and just framework around how we invest in climate at my venture capital firm, Velveteen, we look at it as was mentioned, through an Indigenous lens, where we seek to back the founders that are understanding the problem firsthand, right, and building solutions for it. We do this through, so my partner, who I'll mention again because she's also speaking at SOCAP this year, Carla Brolier, another Indigenous woman from rural Alaska who saw the permafrost melting firsthand. She then dedicated her life to climate change, stood up 7 climate funds, like myself, the first in her family to go to college, the MBA and everything as well, but she worked at the UN for Indigenous Issues and was Al Gore's right hand on his climate reality project. When we had met and first connected, it was around building a group called Native Women Asset Managers with Valerie Redhorse, another renowned Native woman investor, and she essentially on a retreat one year, we were just, driving up the California coast and said, what if we combine forces here on 2 issues that we care so deeply about. My background's building in the children's space with an environmental lens on that as well. And then Carla most recently built the Patagonia Home Planet Fund when Yvonne Chenard approached her after Climate Week one year and helped him set up the Patagonia Purpose Trust. And so I think in so many ways within our communities, we haven't seen this before, right? Like being able to be at the table and included in these conversations, and especially as we talk about the nature-based tracks and the solutions that are focused there, we weave that in through our values. I talk about it in the book. Actually, that's kind of the whole lens, is the spiritual meeting the business components of the 7 grandfather teachings of my tribe, the Anishinaabe, and how we look at it through really everything being weaved together in this beautiful tapestry, right, that it's all connected. And I think more and more thinking around this, especially as it comes to ROI-driven investment, as we have to capture not being an impact fund, right, but trying to create those outsized returns, has been a bit of a challenge. The framework we have around our climate vertical is that it has to touch Indigenous communities in a positive way. So one of our most recent investments, Macro Oceans, does this. It's a 3rd-time founder. He's originally from London, out of SF here now, but he works with rural Alaskan tribes to build the biorefinery to source the material science that he needs built there for community, essentially, to help provide these jobs and so forth, to replace essentially toxic chemicals within beauty products to begin with, and then we're going into ag tech and other verticals. But we were able to see kind of potential unicorn or $1 billion outcome from that particular case. But in the work that you mentioned, Kate, and the work at Patagonia and that Carla's done over the years, so much of it has been more of the ROI on the impact piece, right? So we thought, how can we weave these two together? It really should be around how you're, yes, making an impact, but able to positively affect change for the people that understand, the science itself in terms of the materials and everything that is being sourced there. And I think when we look at having more Native voices around the table, in particular in the climate space, I'm really excited. Actually, I know there's a lot to be, concerned about currently and politically, but for myself, I see us getting to rise up and really, and being the first generation and not go to residential school, really feel like we can claim back our traditions, our culture, and actually implement it into our daily lives to create an even greater impact.
That's beautiful, and I love the positivity here, and that's always a dichotomy when you're covering climate. Like, on one hand, things are so bad, but on the other hand, you come to a conference like this, and there's so much energy and passion and really amazing innovation that's happening. But I'm going to bring it back to the challenges a little bit for just one follow-up question here. And at ImpactAlpha, and we're if you're not familiar, we're a media company that covers the impact investing world. And some of my colleagues are right now moderating other panels on this track, but we're really concerned with this idea of, and the question of, like, what does it look like now in this environment of disruption and peril, like real peril for people, to really step up and go beyond our comfort zones. And I think each of you touched on that in a little bit. Kate, you're working with corporations where they're at, like whatever might be palatable for them at the moment, but can you all touch on that a little bit more? How you're thinking about, or how you're seeing people step up despite the challenges and, the approaches to kind of get around some of those constraints.
I can go if you want. As Amy mentioned, a lot of my time is talking to our business members who are all sizes. They're all over the globe. We have just under 5,000, and across about 60 different industries in 100 different countries. So we have, an incredible diversity, which is really educational and really helpful because we can kind of cross-pollinate. But I would say some of the things that we are seeing sort of in this moment is, in some cases, just straight up financial challenges. And so we have found that really being able to articulate the business value of something like 1% for the planet. And it's been great to have the conversations and to sort of have the mindset of, how do we pitch 1% for the planet to the CFO. And just last June, so kind of right in the thick of this moment that we are in, I was visiting one of our larger members, and I was talking with their kind of community engagement person and CEO who run the 1% for the planet internally, but we were sitting in their lobby, and the CFO walked by, and he was kind of in a hurry. I think he'd been traveling, and it was the end of the day, but the CEO said, "Oh, you should meet Kate while she's here." And so I was like, okay, great, this is my moment. And so I said, "Hey, I know you're on your way out. I'll walk you to the door, but I'd love to hear why 1% for the planet is valuable to you. Why are you still making this commitment?" And without hesitation, and truly without breaking stride, he said, "Oh, it's core to employee engagement. Employee engagement is core to culture, and culture is core to our success." Boom, and walked out the door. So I think what that taught me is I would probably get a different variation on the answer from any CFO that I spoke with, but I think it's one of the lessons for us is, and this is again something that I think has been more important in the philanthropy space than impact investing, but it's just really not shying away from that business case for doing something that is good. I think there can often be that sense of, well, if it's the right thing to do or a good thing to do, it's kind of sullies it a little bit to make the business case for it. And we have so moved beyond that, and that's been really helpful for us in our network to really sort of connect and celebrate the ways that businesses can figure out, each in their own ways, how they talk about this, how they integrate it internally. And I think in this time when there are more headwinds, financial, sort of political, I think, just in terms of the fear factor and the uncertainty factor, like really supporting companies to find, that path forward that enables them to step into the change that works for them and to adapt the change that works for them as the world changes around them.
Sure. I feel like I'm the person who always talks about challenges, so that was me trying to be optimistic earlier. There's a lot I want to say. I guess I'll start with asking, have folks in here heard of systemic investing? Is that a phrase you're familiar with? So it's a space that's emerging, and I think it's really exciting, and I also think it's very desperately needed in this moment, and this idea that it's not enough to just invest in impact. You have to go a bit further and think about how do you ensure that that impact actually succeeds in the long run. So to give you an example of how systemic investors are starting to think about their portfolios, they are not just investing in the technology, so like the EV company that builds the electric vehicles, they're also investing in how it gets deployed. So like who's gonna fund the charging stations, right? So consumers actually feel like it's a viable option. Who funds the education so that people understand there's an alternative? And I'm not saying EVs because I think that's like the most popular thing to talk about right now. I just think it's what people know. But there's so many examples of that across business and government where basically what you see is all this capital dry up at the R&D stage, whether it's early stage venture. I used to run a venture studio investing in early stage climate technologies, and a lot of founders that we worked with were basically given capital based off of milestones. And as they started to scale, they realized, wait, where are we gonna go for other types of capital for our solutions that are not just really technology? We're literally building physical facilities in communities, many communities that have had a lot of development in the past where they weren't included. So they're not necessarily running to say, hey, you new industry, come be in our backyard. I think we're seeing that over and over with carbon technology. And so in 2023, I decided to launch my firm, Eunoia Group. I didn't mention what we do. I know Amy alluded to it, but basically our role and my idea for launching this firm was how can we essentially position ourselves as the Cambridge associates for these emerging assets in this space, because you're no longer really talking about the technology itself, you're also talking about how it gets deployed. And systemic investing looks at how are you actually moving recoverable grants into pre-development so that the corporate can work with the emerging startup and show, hey, this offtake works really well. Or so you can get an HVAC company that's doing the education in a residential building where tenants are not gonna run and put in a new heat pump or even advocate to have a new heat pump, but it actually impacts them, right? And so who's really funding those deployment strategies? And that's really what systemic investing is asking. And I think what I'm really excited about, having come from Europe earlier this summer, is how much sovereign wealth funds there and investment authorities there are actually asking, well, how do we not only invest in venture funds, but what does it look like to also invest in donor advised funds that are moving capital creatively, similar to what you all are doing? Or how can we invest in large infrastructure firms that are saying, hey, we're going to actually allocate 40 to 60% of our investments towards clean energy in ways that we hadn't before? Or honestly, just community trust, where they're saying, hey, we want solar, but we want to have a revenue share model so that we're actually building generational wealth. So I think this moment is kind of calling all of us and giving us all an opportunity to build bespoke portfolios. And I think philanthropy and impact capital is positioned better than ever before to not only test these models at a time where we desperately need new things, but then also I think to really show that it's possible and that you're not necessarily always giving up impact for return, because we're not talking about solutions that are new anymore. A lot of this stuff has actually been around for a long time. So what we're doing is basically saying, hey, this risk is quantifiable, it's qualifiable, and if you understand the risk, you can build a risk return profile that works for your investment committee, that works for your board. So that's what we've gotten to do for the past 2.5 years, and I'll I'll just round this out by saying one of our first projects that I'm really excited about, that if you're interested, happy to chat more about, is essentially a recoverable grant model where we worked with a consortium of families and foundations to actually build out a structure for recoverable grants that goes directly to the company. It's non-dilutive. You don't have to, or the founder and the operators are not required to return that capital, but if they do, great, right? It goes back to the foundation, and then you can keep doing it over and over again. So what are some of these more sustainable models that are actually ensuring that we're not just investing in the R&D or the large facility at the end, but it's really all that missing middle that I'm sure you guys have heard that phrase, this missing middle that really needs to be not only focused on, but there's a huge opportunity from a ROI perspective, whether you're thinking about impact or investment.
Yeah, so we see over a dozen climate tech deals a week that are inbound, mainly through Carla's background and network and people wanting to work with her. The main issue or challenge that we see and have to sort of coach these founders through or mentor, if we're going to look to invest and go down the diligence road, is the human element. So I think we went sort of so sideways in climate tech over the past several years to the point that we had forgotten about the things that, the people this is touching, the impact that it's actually creating. And so that's always, we're having these kind of conversations. As mentioned before, it's the only vertical within our lens that we invest in that does have an impact framework that we had built from scratch around how we figure out to incorporate these indigenous values and communities within the process as we're working with these founders. And so I think that when we look at, some of the largest challenges that we've seen, it's a lot to do with what I discovered when building my nonprofit, Natives Rising. We've now 3x the number of Native founders receiving funding, and it started with indigenous technologists, actually right here in Silicon Valley through my co-founder, who's Pomo. These are her homelands here, Danielle Fore, who will be speaking later today, and I'm so excited about, on the AI paradox here. But what we found in doing this work, we increased the number of indigenous women graduating with STEM degrees by 50% in the past 3 years. The work that actually helped them the most to get there were these healing retreats that we put on. And Danielle and I actually became NLP, neuro-linguistics practitioners, to help rewire and build from this creator mindset of abundance versus scarcity, right? And I think that is the whole kind of conversation when it comes to climate, that we're trying to encapsulate sort of this human element of, to really give that gift of feeling abundance, feeling like you can create something more, and give back to community.
Yeah, again, I love that, and love the abundance mindset. So let's change gears a little bit and talk about, I think there are a half dozen or so sessions left in this track. What are you each excited about? You helped, curate this track. Why don't we talk about what we're interested in? And
Yeah,
Betsy, you already, yes. Why don't you?
Well,
why don't you go?
I did write some notes around this because I didn't want to forget anything. But it was today at 2 p.m. Danielle Forward has her delegate conversation on the AI paradox, innovation or ethical dilemma. This is something that her and I speak about on the daily, honestly, because we lead AI workshops at Natives Rising. I'm just a board member now, but we see such an uptick there in terms of creating the access and the opportunity, right, to our community to really lean in and be able to upskill. Her background is in tech, right? So she built it was Facebook at the time, as the first indigenous product designer there, then built the indigenous community within Google and others, right, to help bring everyone together. And when I had first interacted with her, she was already like a legend in Indian country. We met at MIT Indigenous Women in STEM event, and joined forces there, where I said, what you've done for Native technologists, I want to do for Native founders. So she is an absolute legend in doing this work, and from the tech perspective as well. And I think just getting to hear, on how she's looking from the view of AI and how that's affecting us, and maybe not so positive way, and the challenges as well. The other session that I'm like so thrilled for is 9 a.m. tomorrow. Carla was actually speaking during this session that we're having right now, but she's also speaking tomorrow with 5 other Indigenous-led fund managers. And so really excited about that one, the Indigenous economy and its competitive advantages, ready to scale and ready to lead. There's quite a few, amazing voices that we're all in community with that I think, just bring an incredible perspective.
Before we continue, I keep forgetting to mention that there is a scan code up there. We're going to do an audience Q&A towards the end, so you can be thinking about that while we're up here chatting. Okay.
I'll share my track, but one just quick tap back to the systemic investing idea, which I love, is it reminded me of an article that I became obsessed with a couple years ago. Derek Thompson wrote it for The Atlantic. It's called something like the Eureka Theory, Why the Eureka Theory is Wrong. And basically his premise was like, an idea, an innovation is of course needed, but if it just stops there, it doesn't matter. And what you need is the implementation strategy to go from the 1 to 1 million or 1 billion. And it's a really well-written article and super thoughtful and articulates exactly what you're saying, that the singular tech idea may be amazing, but if you don't have the infrastructure to get it to scale, it might be irrelevant. So I think it's really important, and that article is fabulous. Again, Derek Thompson in The Atlantic, and I'm happy to share it. My staff knows that I'm too ready to hand it out or bring it up at all times because it was so meaningful for me. So in terms of tracks, the one that I'm excited about, all of them are really excellent. It was fun and hard to choose, I think we can all agree, is the financing the future of nature. One of the things I find myself thinking a lot about is, across all the different forms of capital, like how do we know and get smarter about how we allocate it, the right form of capital at the right time and the right combinations, and with the right lenses and right perspectives brought in. And I think we're, making strides on that. But I do think that panel creates a great opportunity to really think about that whole broad, complex issue of forms of capital, different people at the table, and things like that.
Yeah, I guess I'll double click on both of those. I think they're really important and timely. I'll add, and I'm sad I can't remember the name of it, but there is a session on circular economy. And I still sometimes feel like circular economy is like the ugly duckling in climate conversations, but it's so important, I think, especially right now. I was speaking with a guy I met yesterday who told me about their nonprofit that just closed a $500 million deal focused on acquiring waste facilities in Oregon and Washington, and then co-locating solutions. And so I think circular economy, especially with all of the geopolitical shifts and challenges that we're experiencing now, is just very tangible and real, and there's so many solutions that are already working that can scale. And so I think to the extent that we can continue to look at how circular economy is not just saying, hey, this is impact, it's also saying, hey, look at this new way of building economies of the future where we don't see waste as an output that just stays there, right? But something that can be cycled back into value chains. So that's something that I'm really excited to just keep talking about, and hopefully there's a lot of discussion about that this week as well.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, just from our point of view, like we, have incoming, deals and investments and funds that people are working on. And there is so much happening with recycling, upcycling, and circularity. So I agree. And I was an early fan of Bill McDonough's Cradle to Grave, which was like how many decades ago now, right? And here we are. I do want to touch a little bit more on AI because it is such a big topic that comes up in almost every context now, and there's been a lot of talk about it here already. I've been at a couple of sessions sponsored by the Siegel Foundation, and they're very concerned with ethical AI, and if these algorithms are going to have increasing influence over our lives, how do we influence what goes into the algorithm, who has input into that, and who it's benefiting? There are so many issues around AI, And then there's the, the enormous energy consumption that is driving people to, do more gas and even coal to power these things. But at the same time, I think as you were saying, and a lot of climate tech people will tell you that AI can really help reduce emissions by just optimizing everything and making things more efficient. So, little lightning round, like how do we feel about AI?
Well, it's incorporated in all of our companies that we invest in. We've only done a few deals from Velveteen, but I have a track record of over 40, and they have all incorporated now and come on board. But I think what we're trying to do at Natives Rising that I'd mentioned prior is that historically we've been sort of left out of these conversations, and it's like how can we really lead the way and ensure that we are protecting the things that matter to us, and that we can feel that we're weaved into the solution, right? And so it's a much bigger conversation that I'm looking forward to Danielle speaking about later today.
Yeah, and I feel like I am on every day a novice in this area, but I think what we see is some smart operationalizing of it, and I think utilizing it as a tool. I think in general, our 1% for the planet, our perspective is trying to create space for that, be in the conversation around that, but then also to be a voice for, the fact that the Earth is still a physical space on which we, put our feet and in which, things grow. And for us to have, a thriving planet for the future, we have to stay connected to that. So to the extent that AI can be a facilitator of that in a positive, ethical way, we want to be part of that conversation. To the extent that it becomes a sort of barrier or an alternative, we want to make sure that there are ways in which we're kind of creating the right reminders to hey, get outside there and look at a real tree, or something like that, which may sound sort of overly simple, but I think it's actually pretty important that we remember that regardless of what technological tools we create, we still live on a physical planet, and that's an important part of what we're working for.
Yeah, long conversation that could be had. I guess what I will say is I think a lot of the discussion now is focused on global north perspectives, but I was at Edelman's Trust Summit, I think a couple months ago, and 60% of folks in the global south are really excited about AI and what it can do in terms of economic opportunity for them. So I guess I say that just because I think there's so much fear-mongering around what AI is, and it's important to name that it's not new. It's been around for a long time. I was working with AI companies 10 years ago, and I think like with any new industry, because we could apply this to tech as well, it's how do we build things, how are we implementing human ingenuity and connection to nature and how we test and build LLMs, which I think that area is an area that's not getting enough attention. And we saw that with DeepSeek and the fact that, DeepSeek came out and it was like, wait, you can actually have a better LLM. So how are we optimizing those LLMs to be more energy efficient themselves, and not just kind of taking what we have baseline and going, oh, it's going to be extremely, inefficient. So I think that's one area that a lot of research could go into on how are we actually opening up the aperture for innovation and how we build the LLMs themselves. And then I think the second piece that I'll just say is we are doing work with hyperscalers around how do you actually model energy efficiency into the build and the design and the maintenance of data centers, because it is bad. There isn't, in my opinion, a silver lining about how much energy is being used, water is being used, and there's not enough innovation happening fast enough. So I do think that's an area where impact capital, philanthropy can and should focus, because it's real, it's tangible, and there are solutions right now that I think if they had the support, they can plug in to many of these conversations, so we're not doing the thing that normally happens, which is, oh man, look at how terrible this is. There's coal generators everywhere, but there was an opportunity to actually fund a geothermal plant that would have significantly cut emissions. So I just think thinking about all of the different ways that we can actually be efficient in the design itself, both on the LLM side and the infrastructure, is really important.
All right, great. Thanks. And before we go to the audience Q&A, to kind of wrap up here, what are you each looking for the audience or people to take away from the track that you helped design? what questions, what actions?
I guess I can start. I think what I would hope folks take away is that there's a big opportunity right now to actually increase the amount of capital flowing into ideas and innovation in this space. I know the 2% number was mentioned around philanthropy. Like, we can do better. There's a lot of opportunity to do better, especially as we're seeing an attack on climate giving as a whole. Like, what does it look like to look at systemic investing and resiliency? And maybe it's not about using a specific language, but just entering the space to begin with, testing things out. That's what we're supporting folks with doing. So would love to talk to people who are thinking about what that could look like as they build out their portfolios. Another thing that I'm excited about is we actually released a report last week focused on financing next generation infrastructure. We have a free executive summary, and we've basically been, for the past 3 years, pulling together interventions that can have real impact now around energy efficiency, infrastructure, communities. And so if that's of interest to you, would love for you to take a look, and also happy to chat about it.
I think that the biggest competitor to climate action and investment is paralysis. And so I think for the sessions on this topic here at SOCAP, I think the opportunity is learning about a lot of different approaches that are happening, and hopefully being inspired to take action. And to remember that it's not about perfect action, but it's about taking action.
Yeah, in my life, I found that it's all about the reframe and about the vision. So regardless of the challenges that we're up against and we're all facing collectively here, it feels like if we can look towards that reality that we want and live in it realized, weave through our values, that we can get there together. So I am feeling, really optimistic as even we kicked off the panel, but I think that I know that I'm going to leave incredibly inspired by the talks that we've been able to choose and the incredible speakers. So excited for it all.
Yeah, and I would agree on that narrative point, being a media person, but we've been kind of rallying around the idea of shared prosperity, which is something that I think, almost everyone can get behind and is, maybe a more palatable way to talk about the good work that we're all doing and how it benefits everybody. So with that, do we have some audience questions? Okay. There was a hand up too. Okay, just all right, so what are examples of investing in climate, scaling, and valuing nature? Please explain how these are beyond an extractive financial model and a colonial model. Who wants to take that?
I'll give an example from our Planet Impact Fund, which I think is at least adjacent answer to the question. So again, the Planet Impact Fund is donors can make a donation, it's invested for positive impact, and then we also make a donation annually. And what we try to do is have both the investments and the donations line up against those 4 impact areas that I mentioned: just economies, resilient communities, rights to nature, and conservation and restoration. And currently, one of the nonprofits in our portfolio that receives the grants from the Planet Impact Fund is KKT, which is an Indigenous Ranger program in Australia. And they focus on sort of tapping into Indigenous ways of managing and implementing fire mitigation at a time when, increasingly hot and dangerous fires are a big problem in Australia and globally. And so we have that, and a big outcome of that is protecting species that are threatened with extinction. So that's a philanthropic investment in Indigenous biodiversity protection. On the investment side, we have a venture fund that's thesis is companies that are focused on biodiversity. So we're investing at the investment level and the philanthropy level in biodiversity protection, tapping into Indigenous insights as part of that. And so I think, I hope that's an example that gives an answer to that question, or at least, again, is adjacent.
And Chante, you brought up nature in the beginning. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I feel so bad. I can't remember the name of the company that's coming to mind, but they raised a Series A, and I think it's a good example because the founder basically realized through their wildfire restoration software that partnering with indigenous communities made the most sense for implementation, but typically, going back to the systemic investing conversation, they don't have the capital to actually implement with indigenous communities because it takes trust building and time and things that she really cared about. And so what we talked about, I think this was 3 years ago, was basically her going, and I know she did accomplish this, we were not involved in this, but I think it's a great example and something to point out around where grant dollars can have a huge impact. They were able to basically apply for grant dollars for implementation where they were teaching them about their practices and they were teaching about the software and paying this indigenous community, right, to be a part of the solution. So I think that it's this really nice bridge between technology and implementation with indigenous knowledge, right, and ancestral knowledge that is not only really needed in this moment, but can have a huge impact if it's financed properly.
This is exactly what we're solving for at Velveteen. So we're, the way that we've written this framework and given Carla's phenomenal background in this space and working directly with tribes, we wanted to emulate that into everything we did at the foundation of the firm. So we had to get creative because we didn't actually have an example out there of what does an ROI-driven venture capital fund look like that is also making kind of this great ripple, right, and an impact. The way that we did that was a portion of mine and Carla's carry at the firm goes directly back to tribes so that we are not being extractive. We're truly a value add to community. And I think you can seek creative ways to do this throughout the entire scope kind of what you're building.
Great, and I would just add, I'm excited by all the activity in Brazil. Like, they are really, that's ground zero for nature-based solutions, and I think with COP30 happening there next week, that's really going to be, center of the agenda. Okay, next question. Do you see a hunger or value for investing in the development of donors, investors, and founders' skills in change leadership for these volatile times? So, are we investing in the development of human capital to help do this?
Again, this is like the heartbeat of our firm. So I named the firm Velveteen, as you mentioned, because my grandmother got me a plush rabbit from Goodwill when I was 5 years old that I believed if I loved him enough, he'd be real. But that's what founders wake up and do every day, right? They pour enough love, care, attention into something, it can be real. And I wanted to let them know I've walked in their moccasins, I've followed that path, and I also believe. I think that that's a mindset shift around a fund manager sort of being an operator prior, having this kind of experience to then be able to offer and mentor founders in this way. And it's honestly why I wrote the book. It's for builders to be able to align their values with their purpose in the decision making that they have in terms of the nuts and bolts of building a business. So we also do that by providing our founders with extra mentorship and executive coaching, right? Retreats, as I mentioned, the healing retreats. These are ways that, as a serial founder myself for almost 2 decades, that things that I just wish that I would have had along the journey to really help get you there, because it is the thing that actually makes a life, right? And that you can be fulfilled in this work if you're able to sustain the success.
If it's okay, in the interest of getting through some more questions, I'm going to jump to another one. This is a very good one. I was intrigued that carbon markets were not mentioned. Would love the panelists' thoughts on the role of those markets. We did talk about that on our prep call, and it's a big conversation. Anybody want to address that? I mean, I am a big fan of carbon markets. They have their issues, as we all know, but I think some of the standards have really come along, and there is the market is moving towards very high quality, rigorous carbon removal. But the other part of the equation here is that just on a development perspective, right? Like there are clean cook stove makers in Africa and emerging markets. If they can sell carbon credits, which they do for their products, which are avoiding more emissions, that then gives them another revenue stream so that they can lower the price of their product and get that out to more people. So there's a lot of co-benefits to carbon credits, and I just hope that we get the market right and, once and for all address some of the greenwashing issues, because I think it can be a very valuable tool.
Again, I'll give maybe an adjacent answer, but for 1% for the planet on our member side, so not the Planet Impact Fund, but our 1% of revenue member commitment, which is an annual business commitment. Essentially what it does is it gives businesses a budget. So they have 1% of revenues that is their budget to, or part of their budget, to invest in the changes that they want to see. And we do have members who choose to use some or all of that, in some way related to how they're addressing their carbon footprint. And I think what's interesting that we see is in some cases it's critical to them that it be sort of certified in the marketplace. In other cases, they just want to know that they can have a measurable outcome. So for example, we have food banks in our nonprofit network that are diverting measurable tons of food waste from the waste stream and are able to translate that into greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And for some companies who are trying to solve for kind of intersectional issues where the food bank is delivering food to those who do not have enough, while also addressing a measurable interest in addressing their carbon, they've found that to be a good solution, and they care less about needing to have that be a certified credit, but one that they can measure. So just that concept of sort of how you use your budget has been one where we've connected to that issue. We also do have nonprofit sort of offsets that we have certified.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need a price on carbon, so there's that. But I think in the meantime, carbon credits, what I believe can have a huge impact is carbon credits tied to advanced market commitments, like what we saw with the Frontier Fund. So that is something we're thinking about with hyperscalers, like what does it look like to do an advanced market commitment so they're actually adopting some of these solutions. But yeah, I think we could all talk all day about the challenges of carbon markets, but yes, it is a solution. There's a lot of challenges. I think a price is needed, and in the interim, advanced market commitments can be a big lever.
Agreed. There's also a DAF fund that allows donors to do what Frontier does, but on a little bit of a smaller basis called TerraSet. Okay, we are at time, unfortunately. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your very good questions, but let's thank our panel here, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the track.